podcast in partnership with my friends at Canadian Live Music Association. We have a very, very, very special guest today, Tamsin Embelton. How are you? Author of this amazing, amazing book called Touring and Mental Health, the Music Industry Manual. Welcome to this amazing day for all these amazing people as part of the Canadian Live Music Association and this presentation. So, how are you? And hello.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm well, thank you. And it's great to be here. What a lovely introduction.
Well, this has been a true honor for me to be a part of this. I am a massive proponent of touring, help and mental health awareness on tour. I tour for a living, as we're aware. I've spent a better part of the last 7 months out all over this fine world of ours, and there's a lot going on in the world while we're touring. So it's been quite the eye-opening experience, and I think as people are coming into the music industry and as people are deciding whether they want to go on tour, I think that you've written a book here that's incredible, that will give some people some amazing tools to help with their journey. And so, as we get rolling here, I do want to give some people, everyone with Canadian Live Music Association and watching. Uh, what do you do, Tamsin?
So I'm a music industry psychotherapist. So I run an organization called Music Industry Therapist Collective. We're across the UK and the US, and we're branching into Europe. We are in Spain and Germany at the moment. And our whole shtick, our USP, is that all of our practitioners previously worked extensively in the music business before we retrained. So I worked in live and in studios, but mainly live events, venues, things like that. So now what we do is we kind of combine what we've learned through our training, whether it's things about trauma, whether it's stuff about addiction or relationships and all the other kind of mental health difficulties, with our understanding of the particular stresses and pressures of the music industry, to support people in the industry. So we offer one-to-one therapy, group therapy, workshops, seminars, and of course we've written this book together with some friends outside of MITC as well.
It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I love the road case too. That's a great look for it. I don't know if you had design on that, but it looks amazing. Um, there is a lot in this book to unpack. There's a lot about touring to unpack. When you decided to go ahead with this book and put the people together to write it and consult, it had to start at sort of a basic idea. Was it were you seeing some things on tour where it was like, I think I need to start putting pen to paper. We need to start thinking about helping people, and the best way to do that is to pull these professionals together that I know and to help them put this book out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of came from personal experience, really. It's about, in fact, I got a little pop-up on Facebook, how Facebook memories tend to pull us back to different times. 13 years ago yesterday, I was somewhere in Europe, I think it was in Germany, with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, side project Grinderman, and I was tour managing the support act Anna Calvi. And I think, what I realized on that tour, and I'd been kind of managing artists as well, sending people out on the road and dealing with performance anxiety and stress and things like that. But this was the first time I had first-hand experience of it. I'd worked in venues and festivals and events and ran those events and kind of witnessed what happens sometimes backstage in terms of excess, in terms of conflict and stress and people just exhausted, sort of stumbling in on artists being half asleep in their dressing rooms and things like that. But it took me going out on the road myself to realize just quite how stressful it is. I'd really underestimated, what it was taking me away from in terms of all the things at home that keep me stable, usually like having control over what I eat and access to friends and family and lifestyle practice and stuff that keep you stable, but also just the stress of being kind of, plucked out from home and then dropped in these different places where you don't really get enough time to really ground yourself in the place that you're in. You're meeting new people every day, so that in itself is a stressor. And of course, stress is impacting the relationships that with people on the road that you tour with as well. So that can, people respond to stress in different ways. Some people withdraw, some people become, they may drink excessively, or, take more drugs, or find ways to kind of regulate. Some people, excess is kind of baked into the culture often on tours. And yeah, so you'd see these kind of differences in coping and how that would, how people would or wouldn't address conflict on the road. So a lot of the book is about relationships, really, and conflict management, communication strategies, how you talk about mental health on the road, and how you anticipate what you might be facing.
You touched on a point there. I'm a huge proponent of the coping side of it, as far, because we were presented with access, as you said, and coping and how we cope is a big deal. I decided years ago to stop drinking. I'm coming up on 5 years, as far as realizing that the access, as you were mentioning, when you're out there, you need a couple drinks at the end of the tour, at the end of a show. You get on the tour bus, you drive 12 hours. It's just easy. It's just there, as you said. Add to the fact that we're in 1-day relationship mode, as you mentioned, 1-day friendship mode. I think this is one of the biggest factors that plays havoc on touring personnel, because you're meeting people for 1 day. It's a 16-hour blast. It's crew guys, it's riggers, it's venue staff, it's catering staff. It's all these people that you're forming relationships for 1 day. And over a time period of 16 hours, you can talk about a lot of things with people. You can share a lot of things with people. You can, if you're struggling with addiction, there's possibly somebody within that 16-hour day that will also kind of help you along with that, if that's the case. And then you leave the town, and then you do it again the next day. And then you have to go home and turn it off and be in long form relationship mode with your friends, with your family, with your partners, whatever it's going to be. So through that process and through your own experience of touring, how do you turn it on and turn it off? How do you balance 1-day friendships versus like the people that should be in your life, or the people that are supporting you in your life, coming off on tour and trying to turn that switch off of a 1-day friendship for 30 days in a row?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question that can be answered in many different ways depending on the person. But I mean, one thing that I'm picking up on what you said is that you feel like you're always on when you're meeting lots and lots of new people. So there's kind of a performance strain to that. You don't really get much downtime and time to relax. But at the same time, you may be trying to maintain relationships with people at home who are in different headspaces, different stuff's going on, maybe even different time zones and things like that, which can make, kind of genuine contact where you're kind of really aligned quite difficult to access and maintain. And switching modes is really hard. So often I talk with managers about being, when artists may be in a particular mode on tour, like the performances are everything, and you have press and other things to negotiate. So you may not be in the kind of mode of being able to think clearly about admin and about other things that are very in the future. Because on tour, everything's very present. You're problem solving on the fly all the time because things are changing. So in answer to your question, though, because I'm going off on a tangent, but I would say,
all right. This is tangent friendly. It's fine.
Right. Well, it's all interconnected, it's kind of, but I think in answer to your question, I think being really intentional about your relationships and thinking about them ahead of time, and what the impact of the tour will be to relationships, say at home, ahead of time. And it's interesting because today I'm collaborating on an article with a lighting designer called Chris Luce. And when I was researching the book, the book comes from an MA dissertation originally that I did in 2016, 2018. And I came across an article by Chris that talked about exit friction and entry friction that he was experiencing and had heard about other people experiencing in their romantic relationships. And he attributes the phrase to his wife. And I think that's a really great, really concise description of the tension between the kind of anticipatory anxiety before you leave, knowing that there's about to be a separation. And then also what happens when people get home, which is often your expectations of meeting your loved ones and how restorative it'll be, and how you'll connect, is often a bit misaligned with what happens, because you come home, your body is trying to sort of reacclimatize to a different pace, a different time zone, to sort of a different mode of being, trying to come back to sort of earth, really. And at the same time, you've got several people that have different needs that need to sort of be met. So it's really about better communication, really thinking about how do you make the other person feel connected to you? How do you express what's going on for you? Make space for what's going on for them as well, because touring's such a whirlwind, it can kind of take over, and you may feel less aware of what's happening with people at home.
Yeah. No, I hear you, and the thing is that it's a very interesting thing, because there's people like here today that are thinking about going into touring for the first time, or maybe they're getting an offer to be a tour manager for the first time.
Mhm.
They hear these stories, and they hear the stories from the 80s and the 90s, but there's also exhaustion. There's also your health, your body, like your health and your diet and your sleep and all these things that you mentioned that get disrupted. So I guess to stick with this point, then, if someone is thinking about accepting a job on tour, or a band is going on a major tour for the first time, what should they be prepared for, and can they prepare for it? And, like, specifically, speaking from your book, in this portion, maybe you could touch on some stuff within your book that would actually prep them for this departure that they're about to get on.
Okay, well, there's a section at the back all with about self-care. So there's self-care, there's chapters on meditation, on nutrition, on breath work, things like that. You can build up your kind of toolkit for how you manage stress. But I would say really set off with healthy habits. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You don't need to drink at the end of every show to mark it or to celebrate the ending. Really think about yourself the next day, that if you do drink heavily the night after a show, then that may disrupt your sleep. It may have a knock-on effect to your mental state the next day. So it's really about mindset as well. And I like to say that self-care is more of a mindset. It's more about prioritizing your needs and thinking about, how do I look after myself and do my best here in the long term. But it's also about acknowledging that there will be bumps in the road. There'll be ups and downs, there'll be challenges. And if you can stay in a sort of what we call a growth mindset, where you see that as a challenge rather than a threat, then that will help you to collaborate better with others. It will help you sort of anticipate challenges and not be necessarily knocked sideways when it does happen. So it's kind of healthy habits is really helpful. Trying to stay in, find your people on the road that get you, try and build in, say, for example, we talk about really using your days off wisely. So whether that is doing something fun to blow off steam, something that's very different to what you're doing, and can kind of act as a counterbalance, or something creative maybe, or something that's helping your body to relax. I've got one client that finds a Lido or a swimming pool wherever he goes, and sort of has made it one of the things that he's sort of touring the world in swimming pools as well as in venues. So find a way to, you might say that's kind of gamifying his health, his relationship to his health. So it's been very thoughtful as well, and about, how do I respond in times of stress? Do you become more irritable? Do you become more withdrawn? Do you become more, say, tearful? And thinking about, what are the healthy counterbalances? What do you need in those moments? How can you really support yourself and set off on the right foot?
Yeah, when I go on tour, and if anyone watching cares to hear about this, but I always treat it like going, like it's like a boxing match. It's like you're going, you got to get ready to go into a marathon, as you said, or into a fight. So you're not going to get as much sleep as you're used to. Your diet's going to change. Um, you may, again, you're going to miss home, or the routines that you're used to are going to be thrown out of whack. You're going to have angry people on tour. You're going to have people with addictions on tour. You're going to have people that just want to be left alone. So your whole world can get spun upside down. So I think you have to get to the best spot mentally and physically to go into that. Because if you're going to be out for 6 weeks or 3 months or whatever it's going to be, you're going to, by the end of it, you're going to be worn down, and you're absolutely going to have be different than when you left.
This is it. And I think prioritizing sleep is very helpful. I know, for example, that Charles Thompson from Pixies says that his tour bus is like a cocoon. He says you can sleep as much as you like in it. We make it really as quiet and comfortable as possible. They encourage people to rest after the show and help their bodies wind down. So yeah, it's about kind of, and also trusting that you can still perform well even when you're sleep deprived. That, as you say, may be a reasonable expectation. So it's setting those kind of reasonable expectations that it is exciting, and you will meet a lot of interesting people along the way, but it also takes the toll. So how do we minimize the impact of that and prepare yourself?
And musicians and crew people have two different kind of days. So your crew and support staff are on site 6, 7 a.m. and they're there till 3 in the morning. An artist will often just show up for sound check at 2:30 and then maybe go back to the hotel and come back for the gig at 10 o'clock or whatever it's going to be. So their day is different. So your book can touch on all sides of it, whether it be crew, band, but there's two different kinds of processes there. And I try to stay active when I'm out there. I try to visit as many things. I try to find all the best coffee in the world. I do all these little tiny things to try to make my days filled. But your band guys and girls might have 12 hours free in a day on tour on a show day, which is, creates problems all the way around. So do you have a different approach to the artist side of things that you do to the crew and people traveling, or do you kind of consider them one and the same?
No, it's definitely different. And I think there can be a lack of understanding from each two groups. It can seem like artists have it really easy, but they've got a set of pressures around having their name above the door, for example, and being the person that really can't take a day off. I mean, no one, on tour officially can take a day off, of course, because, it's a very tight-knit crew. But there's additional pressures with meeting press, fans, sometimes meet and greets and those sorts of things, which also add a pressure. So there's something about, figuring out, maybe, checking Mastertour or whatever app you're using ahead of time and really thinking, okay, so in 3 days' time, I'm going to be in, let's say, Berlin, and I've got an extra day there. How am I going to use that time? Or I've got this time, as you say, before the show. Can I request that there's always a gym in the hotel? Can I request a pool at the hotel? Depends on your status there, really, and what the budget is. But some venues as well are helping signposts to services that are nearby, areas of natural beauty and parks and things like that, to try and help people understand what's available close. But you're right, crew are the first in and they're the last out. So the days can be incredibly long. And some people that I spoke to suggested that can be more flexible once you get in a few weeks in and everybody's kind of in their stride. Do you need to have everybody showing up, or is that presenteeism? Are there times where you can give people a little bit of time back? And if you do they take it? But yeah, there's, of course, with those very, very long days, then you've got to think about, well, are there breaks during the day? Is the culture on the tour by whoever's dictating it, are they, modeling the behavior they want to see? Are they, keeping people's mindsets sort of on the task at hand? Are they signposting to where to get help? And kind of what's the culture like on the road? Can you encourage people to take even just a half an hour walk around the building, maybe just to get away from your station or your crew room and get a bit of a breather and some fresh air?
You've got a quote in here from one of my mentors in here, Marty Home. He's one of the best guys I've ever met on tour, but he's also the top tour manager in the world. He says it's a perfect book at the perfect time. We in the touring industry have never really addressed or embraced the aspect of mental health in the touring industry, and the time to do it. So Marty has a great approach on tour. He's very approachable. Not all production managers or tour managers are like that. Some are yellers. Some are screamers. Some are just they like to get it done a certain way, and then it really gives you probably an insight into what their life outside of touring might be like as well. Um, do you touch on that in the book as far as relationship wise? We talk about balancing relationships and the one day friendships that we're in when we're in a building, but how about the 100 people that you're on tour with
Yeah.
and you're stuck with them for 3 months? You're not going to get along with everybody. There's righties, there's lefties, there's people in the middle, there's all sorts of people that are on tour with you. What part do you recommend in the book where people can talk about balancing the relationships?
So there's a section, so the book's in 6 sections, and one section's on relationships. So there's a chapter on romantic relationships, a chapter on group dynamics. And I think that one's really helpful because it talks about how groups, how healthy groups form and function. And also it has some leadership principles in there as well, because you're right. I think there is a bit of thought at the moment. When I've interviewed a lot of high profile tour managers and production managers, where they're looking back and saying, I used to kind of rule the roost in a different way by using kind of intimidation to get people to do what I needed them to do. But now I'm thinking about that, and I'm trying to find ways to empower people, to trust them, to build communication so that actually, when you have a group of people who are intimidated, they don't necessarily come to you when there's a problem. And on tour, you need people to do that very quickly because, there is a sense of urgency there. So it's about kind of this mind shift, which is a broader cultural shift outside of the industry as well. But of course, we have this new generation of people as well who are saying, okay, well, I'll go and get myself some mental health first aid training, or I'll train up somebody on the road, and then we've got a confidant on the road that people can go to. So people are thinking about how they can do it differently. And of course, we need artists as well to say, we're employing certain people. Here's how we want the culture to be on the road. And so, change comes from the top and from the bottom, ideally. That, of course, we need artists to be on board and to be responsible for the people they're employing and the tone they're setting there as well. So there's a lot of guidance for tour managers. We even go, sort of before you get off on the road, we're saying, can agents and promoters think about these things at the time when they're routing tours? What are the blocks that are in the way for some of the intensity of tours we're seeing after COVID, for example, are, really compressed. People are trying to cram a lot more in because there's been lost momentum, lost earnings. And of course, you're seeing more and more people burn out. It feels like more and more anyway. I don't know whether we haven't got a measurement of what's the ordinary amount of people burning out on the road and what's happening now. But certainly there's more people talking to the press.
Well, and post-COVID, there's definitely a change
Yeah.
because people are now deciding how they want to spend their time. They're just spend, they're how they, what kind of tours they want to go on. All the bands went out, so everyone, for the most part, was working. There was tons of people working on tour, and then with that comes, 10 months straight of work, 11 months straight of work that didn't exist when everyone was off for 3 years,
Yes.
or 2.5 years. So it's definitely changed. And to your point on the mental health side, I'm hearing it more than ever on
Mm.
tour, where there's opportunity to kind of take a break and, talk to, your person on tour and sort of get into that. What I definitely, back to me for a second, as far as quitting drinking. I mean, that was a 2019 into 2020 situation for me, or sorry, 2018 into 2019 situation for me. And so I had a year of touring before COVID in that. Then COVID hit, and then I came back and I saw more people than I've ever seen before that weren't drinking or weren't, they just had made that switch over that COVID, saying I needed to get better. I needed to feel better. I do believe it was, unfortunately, it was the break that our industry also needed to kind of tidy everybody up a little bit. And now they're back out with a new kind of touring in front of them. Your discussions that you're having currently, what are some of the issues that crew musicians are facing on tour right now that you're seeing or hearing, based on your discussions, and even maybe when you're putting the book together?
So, I think we've touched on some parts already today. So stress and burnout, and on tour, stress is cumulative and it hits you, it can hit you biologically, psychologically, and socially. It's usually a combination of those factors. Of course, various forms of anxiety. You know, some people are coming out of this period of time with COVID, and just being around people has been anxiety provoking. You know, maybe some of that's subsiding now, but the after effects of COVID, you know, it's affected some people's tolerance and their capacities. So that, you know, we're still figuring out the after effects of that period for us. Depression, you know, isolation and loneliness can be a big thing on the road. As you say, some relationships are transient, or that, you know, they're very quick. Or people may not want to open up too much with the people that they're working with on the road. You know, they may not feel comfortable doing that. You know, alternatively, groups can form cliques and gossiping and that sort of thing. So that's often coming into the therapy space as well. It's, you know, how do we manage kind of conflict or people feeling scapegoated? So that's, you know, people take certain roles when groups are dysfunctional. I won't say, you know, I feel like sometimes that I always harp on about the most difficult parts of touring. And I will say, you know, it can be a really enriching experience, and you can really learn a lot about yourself and develop incredible skills and relationships as well. But the usual things are, so what came up in various forms of research has been stress, anxiety, pressure to relationships, depression, and suicidality, addiction, of course, because dependencies are quite easy to form on the road, because alcohol and other drugs can be effective relaxants. You know, we wouldn't use them if they weren't effective. So, you know, that, and of course they're freely available. Maybe less so now, it depends on the state you're in, I suppose, as well, in the States, for example. But yeah, so in that scenario, when it's high stress and you've got readily available substances, then you can see how dependencies on them may form. And of course, dependencies can lead to addictions as well, depending on various other factors. And then for some people, there's traumas that occur on the road. You know, there's sexual assault, for example, or, you know, heaven forbid, there can be events can happen in festivals. You know, we've certainly seen a fair bit of that over the years as well. So sometimes having some trauma training, sort of first responder training, can be helpful as well. But yeah, so it's kind of, it's varied. I don't know whether they've definitely sort of, whether issues, there's a different sort of kind of constellation of issues since COVID necessarily. But then, you know, you let me know if you feel like that's wrong.
I think that there's definitely more support. You touched on some of the people that have helped support this book, and we can dive into that, because I want to actually ask you about how did you do it. So you've had a lot of support on the book, and there's been more support, as I said, post COVID. I've seen of more mental health programs out there for people. But putting this thing together, putting the book together, trying to design it, put your team together, and publish a book, which is a huge undertaking in itself. You know, how did you do it? How long did it take to put this together? And what were your key factors in your brain about trying what you wanted to cover when you did it?
Yeah, I mean, it did take a long time, I must say. I think there were, you know, really, I suppose if you say that started the initial research in 2016, and, you know, it came out early this year. So there's years of research, but there's a huge team involved in it. I've written about 7 chapters, I think it's 7, 6 or 7, and there's 30 chapters overall. So for example, we've got chapters on hearing health, vocal health, sexual health. We've got chapters on trauma. We've got chapters on, you know, sleep science and all sorts of different things, and nutrition on the road as well, because we believe in looking at things holistically. So we had I mean, the support has been phenomenal. Very lucky that I started to crowdfund to pay for the book and to pay for the writers. And that crowdfunder was seen by Michael Rapino at Live Nation, and he funded the book, which was amazing. And they also, Live Nation have pre-bought 3,000 physical copies for their venues, and they've also pre-bought 500 ebooks for their staff. And now we're looking at turning the book into Spanish. We've got a Spanish version coming out next year, possibly a Danish version, and maybe some other versions coming later down the line as well. So the support's been great. So essentially the process of the book was figuring out, the main areas we wanted to tackle. So that was, helping people really understand what mental health is all about, differences between mental health, mental illness, neurodiversity, how mental health and mental illness develops. So there's a whole chunk on background, and in that section, there's a great chapter by a researcher called Geordie Shenton. I asked him to analyse all the research we could find, so like 100 studies or something similar to that, and to tell the story of, what is happening in the music business more generally, and then specifically in touring. And then there's these other sections on like relationships, on stress and trauma and addiction and eating disorders, and these other kind of sections. And then we found the people that were the specialists in those areas with the music industry background to write them. And whilst all that was happening, and while we were editing these other chapters that were coming in, I interviewed around 80 people in the end, who were prominent tour managers like Marty and Jake Berry and Misty Roberts and Jim Digby and all sorts of people, Tina Farris, and artists as well, none of whom I can remember at this moment, but it'll come back to me. So we had Philip Selway from Radiohead, we had Katie Mellower, we had Will Young, we had who else? No, it's all gone, but they're all in there. So what we did was then we analysed these interviews and we selected quotes to bring the chapters to life, because we didn't want it to be too dry. Just mental health books can be a little dry sometimes, so we wanted to bring everything to life. And like Marty had some great quotes in there about, how does a user growth mindset to cope with when big plans change, for example, like when Fleetwood Mac had to put them all in a Best Western after a show because there was a storm and none of their private planes could fly, and he had to break the news that they were all staying in a Best Western. Or there's various other kind of insights and suggestions in there which are quite interesting. And yeah, so that's kind of how we wrote it.
That must have been an exciting feeling when you actually published it, got it out. Obviously, as you mentioned, Live Nation bought a bunch for their staff and for their venues. It's just a great feeling because no one knows what to expect when a book comes out. But this touches on this industry that is so massive, and everyone has so many questions about how to get through the day-to-day. They think it's, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and everyone's this, and it's a party all the time. But it's changed so much now, and mental health is, to me, is really the forefront of the touring industry now. There's so many bands putting it, front and center for their artists, or for their crew, and their people, and I think it's amazing because I definitely think, as I mentioned, I definitely think it's changed since COVID. I think it's gotten way more prominent, and and artists and bands are taking more ownership of it. So prime example, Louis Capaldi halts touring for foreseeable future. He had just gotten off the stage at Glastonbury. I was on that stage. I was there for that weekend. He had just played prior to the artist that I was touring with, and he had one of the best shows of the festival. 200,000 people out there, and people losing their mind and just loving life. And he says he's thanks to Glastonbury for having him sing along when I needed it, and for the amazing messages afterwards. That's the statement. You guys can read it online if you so choose. But Lewis decided to take a break from touring, and Shawn Mendes decides to take a break from touring. And I think it's really interesting that artists are now just basically flat out like, I'm burnt out, I'm spent, I have to take a break to give you the best show possible. I think it's pretty amazing that artists are owning it and stepping up and saying it, and in turn, hopefully taking care of their people.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because I guess, yes, it's great that there's that transparency now, but I feel frustrated that it gets to that point now with Lewis, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, and I don't know his team, but there were indicators before that show. I think he'd cancelled a show a couple of weeks before, and he'd sort of slowed things down a bit, and then came back for this huge show. And Glastonbury's our biggest festival in the UK. Everyone's watching at home, and the audience is massive. I kind of feel like there were some signs there that he was struggling ahead of time, and those red flags were missed. And look, artists have burnt out on the road and had breakdowns, psychotic episodes, they've had addiction relapses, for decades, but we've used euphemisms. We've said it's exhaustion. So a good friend of mine, Jodie Milstein, who pointed that out, and I was like, yes, that's what. So we're not using euphemisms now. So we've got artists to thank for that. But what I don't know is happening yet, and Brent, you tell me if this is wrong, but is this filtering back? And what we don't have is industry standards. Like, how many shows is a reasonable amount of shows to do in a week? You see some artists going, I can do 6. You're like, really? That's a lot. Like, how long can you do 6 in a row for? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe are you just really young, or is it not very vocal heavy, or like, I don't know. What are the kind of?
I think it depends on the level of touring. I mean, I went down to a punk rock show in Vancouver a couple of months back with a friend of mine playing drums, and I looked at his, I went down to see him, hadn't seen him in a while. He was so excited to get back on tour.
Yes.
And it was like one of the classic 5-band punk tours. So everyone's sharing gear. They're all sharing vans. They're sharing hotel rooms. They're splitting the $3,000 or whatever, the $2,000 or the $5,000 or whatever's coming in. They're doing it. But I'm looking at a schedule, and they didn't have a day off for 3 weeks. They played every single day, and I was like, no way. There's no way I could do that. But they just couldn't wait to play. And obviously playing live is its own drug in itself, and you like playing, and it's great. But I was like, there's no possible way. I wouldn't even tour manage that. I wouldn't do it like at this point, because I know just mentally and that I couldn't do that many. I've been with bands that have done 3 in a week. I've done with bands that have been 4 in a week. Often it's seasonal. So if you're doing the summertime in America, you're doing the amphitheater tours, so you can do 3 in a row and take a break, because they're quicker drives. It's a bit of a smoother process. But I don't know. I don't know what's healthy or what's not healthy. I think it's per band, really.
Of course, it absolutely is. And what I will say about the DIY scene, and my history is definitely part of the punk DIY scene back in Liverpool, but there is something that is preserved when you maintain your autonomy on the road. That's one of the brilliant things about the DIY scene, right? Is that you do maintain your autonomy. And when you give up your autonomy, like when artists get bigger and bigger, or there's bigger teams involved, then you lose something in that. We know that reduced autonomy really impacts your mental health. I don't think there's any scenarios where it wouldn't. And that's one of the things that can be compromised. But we shouldn't underestimate, and I think sometimes people do underestimate, the toll that being on stage can take. There's some very early stage research that suggests that, a performance your cortisol levels, your stress hormone, and you have lots of different hormones involved in performance. Some of them are really good and restorative and feel brilliant, but it's also what we call a positive stress experience, but that also can take a toll on your body. And your cortisol levels can be as high as this skydive, and they're not quite reaching base level by the next day. And so on tour, the next day, you're starting at a rate, say your base level is here, you're already starting a bit higher, and you may have another show. And then the day after, you may start, your base level stress may increase. So that's one of the it's a hypothesis I have about how stress accumulates on the road. But, the other thing about the tour you described is there's a real community there. There's a sense that everyone's in it together. So I think there's some psychological elements for some tours that can be helpful, but we all have different stress thresholds. Some people their bodies are more reactive to stress. They may have more stress-related illnesses, for example, like Lewis, who you mentioned before, that's Tourette's. That may increase in times of stress. In the Glastonbury show, which I haven't watched all of, but he was struggling to get his words out, and the crowd carried him along, which, so that kind of shows you the physical impact and the psychological impact of that stress exposure.
Well, and if you struggle with like stage fright or any kind of like pre-show nerves, and then it's like adrenaline hits that's happening all the time. And I was speaking to a firefighter friend of mine, and he said he likens bands that are going to concerts like firemen. And because it's a hit, and it's not quite as frequent as what happens to firefighters, men or women, but the issue is more like you come down, and then you then you go up, and then you come down, and then you go up, and then you come down. And then there's things, and you asked earlier about getting ahead of it, or recognizing it. Well, from the people that I know and first responder people that I know, there's checks and balances in place for them
Right.
as they get into their 50s and closer to their 60s, to start winding them down from the adrenaline hits, because
Yes.
it's like, it's go out, and whether it's a fire or it's an accident or something, it's a major sort of like adrenaline hit, and then it comes back,
Mhm.
and then you got to bring it down, and then all of a sudden it hits again. And touring and music, and getting on stage, or can be that. And then for crew, you've been working all day, and then you have a bit of downtime, and then you got to put it back out. So yeah, I mean, checks and balances. You're never going to convince a tour or a band to like take less shows if there's more money there. So it's putting the checks and balances in place to
Yeah.
try to make sure your crew is getting through it, and make sure your team, and your artists and your performers are getting through it. So
And maybe, that's where brands come in as well, that they can help to sort of make up that shortfall, maybe, so that we can have healthier touring. So to break even, we don't have to push people quite so hard. Uh,
right,
and often it's when artists get to burnout that's when the next time they tour, it changes a little bit. And they say, well, actually, I'm going to take, as you say, an extended amount of time off. When I come back, we'll
yeah.
do it differently. So we learn from these times as well, I guess.
As we roll through, tell me about this. So you guys are offering therapeutic service. Well, you offered therapeutic services at Roskilde Festival. So in essence, you were at the festival providing services for people, breath work with practitioners, stress management, anxiety relief. You had all sorts of things that people had an option to visit at the festival. Is that something that you want to do moving forward at more events? And what kind of services are you offering for people at those things?
Absolutely. So this is MITC Soundcheck, we've called it, and it is, well, it's evolving at the moment to include a pre-festival program, which might include, well, it might include all sorts of different things, performance psychology, things like that, but skills building for different groups. It might have mental health first aid, things like that. It might have kind of harassment training or group dynamics, communication and conflict, and then on-site support as well. So last year at Roskilde, we had injury prevention, we had breathwork sessions, we had stress relief, anxiety management, and then we had also our pop-up clinic, which had physiotherapists and a medical doctor, and also therapeutic coaching as well by experienced psychologists and psychotherapists who speak variety of languages. So it was trying to give something, and so those services, for example, we had artists coming in individually ahead of their show, and they would have maybe some hypnotherapy, or they'd have something to ground them and help them get into the right mindset. We had groups coming in talking about the group dynamics and how they'd kind of navigate that a little bit better when stresses were kind of becoming apparent. We had people coming in talking about their relationship to alcohol. We had people coming in talking about how hard it was for them to sleep after the show and how could we help them wind down. So it was quite a variety of things, and then lots of physical issues coming too. So in the future, we're looking at things like, making sure that people have hearing health support before they get to site, or they have whatever it is they need. There'll be a needs assessment, essentially, is the short answer, and then we will address what those physical, psychological and social needs are and put together a program. But this, just to be clear, this was for Roskilde's I can't remember what they call it actually. It's a pre-festival festival for the emerging artists.
Nice. I've seen a little bit of support like at some of the festivals. I did a lot of the European festivals this summer in particular, and there was some really cool setups there that help people with their day. Um, I'm really loving the fact that the promoters and the different people are taking the initiative to make sure that everyone has the best day that they can possibly have at these things, recognizing that they're away from home, away from their families,
Mm.
I'm seeing many portable gyms set up backstage. I'm seeing
Nice.
full yoga classes set up backstage. There's a barber shop at Copenhagen this year. There's like all these really cool things that you could just go in and feel normal
Yes.
for your 12 hours that you're on site. And I think it's so important for our industry. Can you comment then on some of the tools that you know of now that are existing for the touring industry currently, as we touched on earlier, people that are getting into the business for the first time, that are watching this with our friends here at Canadian Live Music Association, that are thinking about getting into touring, thinking about going up for the first time, and then potentially people that are a part of this today, that have already been on tour, that they might not be aware of some of the tools that exist out there.
For sure. So there is a chapter that goes into this in more detail. I think it's chapter 5, Healthy Touring. So there, depending on where you are, there's various different organisations available that may offer helplines that you can also access, of course, on site. Helplines, grants and funding providers for, say, therapy, things like that. And then there's people like Music Support, an amazing charity in the UK who we are big fans are at MITC. They've got a helpline, but they also do these kind of safe hubs in Live Nation festivals in the UK, where you talk to somebody who's from the industry, who has some training, some understanding of what you're going through. And then they run like 12-step meetings on site. So people who are sober on site can drop in twice a day or sometimes once a day. I have to double check that they're still doing these, and meet like-minded others and stay on track with their recovery goals. And on that note, there's this wonderful organization over in Detroit, Passenger Recovery, run partly by Chris from Electric Six, and they offer what we call Safe Passage, which is helping someone get from A to B without falling off the wagon. So helping an artist maybe get, or someone on the crew, get from their hotel to the venue, and maybe to 12-step groups and things like that. Then there's Safe Tour, which is an American organization that is harassment training for people on the road as well. There's all sorts of different things out there. We're actually halfway through developing an online database of resources which will be free to access. So if you keep on track with touringmanual.com, we've got some resources on there. There's a free Fear of Flying chapter you can download by a wonderful guy called Marty Seif, and that will also have this database on where you can look up and see where you are, see what's available for you.
Now, as far as we touched on the touring side of it, we touched on getting ready for the tour. Do you touch on post tour?
Hold on one
So,
I've just realized my laptop isn't charging and it's just about to die. Give me 1 second.
well, that's fine.
Do you repeat
No
the question?
problem.
I'll think about it.
So, what we're going to talk about next is obviously post touring. What I want to touch on is the coming off tour. I touched on it a little bit earlier about how when we come back off tour, we have to basically move into being normal again. And we touched a little bit earlier on one-day relationships. So what that's like to meet, hundreds of people over the course of 3 months, 4 months, and then you have to come home and turn that off and talk to your neighbor down the street about what they've been up to, and what they've been up to since you left could be as simple as, oh, I cut the grass, went and watched a football game, built a deck, and then you have to how do I explain it? You have to get into that space of like, right, how can I talk about standing on stage in front of 100,000 people and the adrenaline rush and the crazy when it's things are just chilled and normal back home, and you have to adjust in. So what kind of tools, obviously we know about that, we talked about what they exist, but what kind of tools would you recommend to people when they're coming to try to get back into it, and where do you touch on that in the book? She's back. We got her. Tamsin, welcome back. Sorry. I was just about to wrap it up and here you are. So the internet's a terrible thing, isn't it? It's just terrible when it goes down. But okay, well, as we move along here and finish up, because we don't know when we're going to get hit with the internet bug again. A few things. I want to send people to your website here, touring, and It's basically touringmanual.com. This is just dedicated to the book specifically. You've got your site as well, but this is you've got some great news articles in here where you actually spoke about Lewis Capaldi, and people can sign up. There's some great resources. There's a great chapter in there, free chapter about fear of flying. And as I mentioned before, I did 150 flights last year, so that's definitely a thing for people. I don't know how, I respect people's struggles, but I'm not sure how people can do this business without flying,
It's hard. Yeah.
It's
It
extremely.
depends on the location, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot of resources on there, and we're just about to. Well, I'm kind of maybe an eighth of the way through recording the audio book, which will be out next year. And eventually, we're going to turn the book into, and we're starting to work on this now, online courses. So we'll build it out a bit, and there'll be various courses based on the chapters and the topics within that people can sign up to and be guided through. And then our MITC website is musicindustrytherapist.com. So you can find us all on there, talk to us about MITC sound checks, quite a mouthful. And then, I really wanted to mention as well these two amazing organizations in Canada. And it's a good thing for me to remember, actually, because I really want to reach out to them. But there's the Musicians Clinic of Canada. So that's musiciansclinicsofcanada.com. And then there's the Unison Fund, which also support people in getting therapy and various things like that. So that is unisonfund.ca.
Unison Fund were a big help for a lot of us during COVID. So they definitely financed a lot of people and helped a lot of people get through it. So definitely there's tons of resources out there. Final takeaways for everybody that you would like them to take away from your book, and any encouraging words for anyone looking to get into the business.
I would say, really try to get to know yourself, get to know your limits, get to know the areas for potential growth and your strengths as well. One of the things we've got on the website is a pre-tour questionnaire, which can help you figure out what's worked for you in the past, if you've got touring experience, or what skills you might have that you can use for touring. But also really think, we're relational creatures. We need community, we need social support. So figure out how that works for you, whether it's sponsors, whether it's people on the road, off the road, people who are on different tours. They're out there. There's lots of wonderful groups out there now specifically about this. Good thing about COVID is people all over the world have been more connected online. So there are online groups that are, specific to, like the Back Lounge by Susie Green, which is an online support group. And I know Backline in the States had similar. So there is support out there. Do look for it. And of course, hopefully in about 4 to 5 months, we'll have this online database ready for you to access as well.
Well, that'd be amazing. Hopefully you'll come back on and we'll talk about it. We'll go line by line and give everyone an online course about it. This is Tamsin Embelton. Thank you so much for joining today and speaking to everybody here at Canadian Live Music Association. And I encourage everybody watching and attending today to pick up this book and dive in. Just even if you've never toured before, you're gonna dive in and see what we all go through on tour, and decide for yourself whether you want to make a career out of it, and go from there. Where can everybody find you online before we let you on go?
So I'm on the socials at Tamsin Embelton or at Tamsin Embelton 2 on Facebook, and you can find the book on Amazon. In the States, it's in Barnes and Noble. I don't know where else it is in Canada actually, but yeah, you can. We are MITC on the socials as well for music industry therapists.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you to my friends at Canadian Live Music Association for allowing us to have this discussion today, and a very important one at that. And to all the attendees that attended today, thanks for your time. Tamsin, all the best in the future. Look forward to all the online stuff that's coming with that. That's Do Did Will, the Story of People podcast for another week. Take care, everybody. Be safe, be wonderful, and rock and roll.